Are you a real estate investor looking to sharpen your skills or a newbie looking to become one? You're in the right place. Welcome to Where Should I Invest? Real Estate Investing in Canada with your host, Sarah Larbi.
I'm excited to have you on. You've been a leader for me, a mentor for me. Really, if I look back and I say, who's the best, leader I've had, it, definitely hands down, it's been you. How did you, originally get started in real estate? Maybe we'll start there and then go from there.
Sure. It's a funny story, Sarah, because when we worked together, I remember we worked at Mars together, and I used to come into the boardroom on a Monday morning, complaining about my investments. Do you remember that? You and I had a good relationship, and I would complain to you every once in a while about, my returns aren't that great. A friend just lowered his return. I was investing in Florida specifically. I remember a conversation we had a few times, and you kept saying, Dave, just try buying a house. Just try it, try it. It's like, just try. And I finally decided to try, and it was, so I have to thank you, because you really kind of dragged me into it because of your enthusiasm at the time for real estate. And, I tried it, I loved it, and I just kept going.
That's awesome. So, I mean, just to give, everybody a little bit of background. So you used to invest more passively. So you'd have the cash and then you'd make, 9, 10, 11% or whatnot. But I do remember having that conversation about, I'm like, oh, you're making 10%. Like, look at these returns on these properties. It's, the cash flow, the mortgage pay down, and the appreciation. And then when you put all those things together, even just the appreciation, average appreciation and mortgage pay down, you're probably at that 10% mark, and then the cash flow on top of it. So, I do remember during our lunch breaks, we'd talk about real estate or, after work, but it was always, super fun. And then you went in and you bought your first one. So maybe walk us through a little bit how that first deal went.
Okay. First one was in Brantford, and my first 3 were in Brantford. And, I couldn't find the exact house that I was looking for, but I really wanted in. And it was probably about between 4 and 5 years ago now. And it was a 2-bedroom house that I still own today. And I remember, my wife, Anita, she always had this standard for what would we live in. And maybe that was the hardest part about buying our first house, was that we had to shake that standard, right? We had to say, this is an asset and not where we're going to raise our family, right? And so it only had 2 bedrooms, but it had a finished basement and it had a garage. It was one of the only houses on the street with a garage. We bought it for $232,000. And we weren't sure how it was going to go. At the time, that felt like a lot of money. Now, to be able to, if I could offer anyone out there to buy a house in Brantford for $232,000 with a finished basement and a detached garage, I wonder what they would say, right? They'd be like, heck yeah. So
yeah, for sure. And one of the funny things is that you're like, Sarah, you got in early,
Yes.
got in, because I mean, when I was first buying, they were, under 200, and then you were like at the 2.5 mark. And I'm like, you know what, in 5 years from now, it won't matter. And you'll be, starting at that point, like I'm just thinking of your Catherine house. That's probably worth $550 in today's dollars.
It is. Yeah. I just had it refinanced recently,
Oh, nice.
For $500,000. And the bank said, we know you can get $550 for this, but that's what the appraisal came back at.
Nice.
So yeah, it's been really great, and I remember you telling me that, Sarah, that, we talked a little bit about, well, at what point is it too late? And for me, I still follow the same rule of thumb today. What is my ROI in percentage from what I'm investing? So what am I putting in for closing costs and a down payment and repairs? And, what will my percentage return be? And of course, the golden rule, I think, or what I've learned from you, the first thing I learned from you was about cash flow. And obviously that makes sense. And now it's the big buzzword, right? But you and I talked about that 5 years ago about, how do you cash flow houses, and how do you make sure that it's cash flowing, and what do you include in your in your formulas to make sure that you are making money so that you're not running out. And when I've talked to people over the years about why they got into the real estate investment game, and the ones that got out that don't have a great story, they weren't cash flowing almost every time, or they weren't following a process to screen tenants.
Yeah, that's the other big one.
It's the other big one.
Especially in Ontario.
Yeah, it's the other big one, and so that first buy just led to another and another. I think first year, we bought 3 houses in Brantford in 12 months.
Nice.
And we just decided to go, right? And I think, from knowing me, Sarah, I prefer to go and make a mistake. I'm like that with everyone. And I decided early that I could live with the consequences, that I wasn't going to lose everything from buying a house. I might lose a button if I made a mistake. And I've lost a couple buttons over the years, to be honest. But it's been a fantastic experience, and it's where my passion lies. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember actually one time when you were going and you were like buying and you're closing, you wanted to close on 2 at the same time. And I think it was like when you were it was your first one or your second one. And I'm like, it does take some work to close on something, and then just like getting everything set up and putting the tenants in. I'm like, but it's great to see, what you've done in a very short amount of time, but also I think you actually still bought at a good time. And because you bought on cash flow, and I think that's a great thing that you mentioned, you're going to be able to take a lot more of the ups and downs and the market cycles, and versus people that are looking for just appreciation, right? They're just buying really high and hoping that it keeps going up. Well, I mean, especially now, we don't know what's going to happen in the next year or two, and what the government's going to do. And to be honest, I don't really trust them. So, at any point in time, they might want to start putting some sticks in the wheels to slow things down. And if you're cash flowing, at least you're able to hold on to those properties, have your tenants that you've screened well, keep paying the rent, and, slowly get out of that down cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I also feel like, it's even now, it's never a bad time to buy. It might be a bad thing to count on appreciation. But there are still deals out there, and it's just so hard to find them, right? That's the challenge. But, if you are cash flowing, then you can, I don't think, I've played through different scenarios, as I'm sure all the investors have out there, but I don't see rents going down in any scenario. Just with what's happening, things can happen to control rents, but I don't see them going down. That would mean an oversupply in the market, and that's just not going to happen.
I agree with you, because especially with the under 1% is our vacancy rates right now for most of Ontario.
Yeah, it's there's going to have to be some crazy things happen for the rents to not be where they are. So if you're cash flowing with today's rents, it's a little bit of protection there for you, right? Even if you don't get the appreciation, which I've never counted on, to be honest. So, and by the way, just going back to that, how I used to invest passively, and my investment went from 10% to 9 or 8%, and then down to 7. And I don't have a house that I don't get at least, I think my lowest one is 13 or 14% return without appreciation. So right. Just counting mortgage pay down in cash, and sometimes I've had to do things to change that, I've created a duplex in Halifax to get that cash flow, some of your other lessons. But yeah, as long as you're cash flowing, you're not at big risk.
Yeah, I like that you said that. So 13%, just the cash flow and the mortgage pay down. I mean, obviously we know what happened to appreciation in the last couple of years. I mean, I want to say in most markets, especially, like Brantford as an example, that's been, 30% plus since the
Yes.
pandemic started. But again, like you said, we don't want to, it's icing on the cake. We don't want to be banking on that. But that 13%, I think, could also become infinity once you refinance your money out. So I think a lot of the ones that you originally did in the beginning, because they made sense to do that way, we'll get into your Halifax duplex in a second, but a lot of the ones that you did originally.
Thanks so much for listening to Where Should I Invest with your host, Sarah Larbi. Make sure to listen in next time. We'll catch you on the next episode of Where Should I Invest?